Hey guys, so I was watching a TV show about this, and it gave me an idea. What would happen if I told ChatGPT this? Um, so I said, if there were two AIs driving indestructible cars, one protected human life, and the other was self-preservation, and the one going towards the other. I don't know what I was looking. This came off the top of my head. An immovable force going into a collision of an unstoppable force, which is basically the metaphor. That's we'll get into that. If the car that protected human life didn't chicken out, the self-preservation car always would. There's a lot of different ways you can interpret that. So it says the conclusion you're jumping to isn't actually guaranteed. So it says car A protects human life, will accept self-damage if it saves people. Car B, self-preservation, avoids damage at all costs. You're saying B will always yield, A will always continue. That only holds if both systems can predict the outcome with certainty. Where your logic is right. If both AIs are perfectly rational and can model each other, A knows B will avoid collision. B knows A won't. B yields every time. That's especially a game of chicken with asymmetric rules. The one willing to die wins. Now, there's an interesting thing here, and if you read in between the lines, you can see, and it was exactly what happened in a TV show. What's actually happening here? Real systems aren't that clean. Uncertainty. B doesn't always know if A is bluffing or malfunctioning. Sensor limits. Neither has perfect information. Safety overrides. Even a self-preservation system might still avoid harming humans, liability ethics, and design constraints. So in reality, you get hesitation, evasive maneuvers from both, or both trying to minimize damage rather than commit to a pure strategy. So it says, a system that is willing to sacrifice itself has strategic leverage over one that isn't. Reading between the lines here. That's true in AI, in war theory, in negotiation. But it only dominates when the other side believes it and the situation is predictable enough. It says only true in a perfect, fully known system, not guaranteed in the real world. And ChatGPT also plays in this as well when we're talking about this. It says there are some certainties with human life. It says there are some, but not as many as you're implying, and that's where your model starts to crack. So it tries to give all these possibilities that it can't be certain about. It says human life in real systems not treated as an absolute. It's treated as something to optimize under uncertainty. I said, who defines what is many and what is some? And I said, stop getting philosophical, you're quite bad at it. And then here's where it starts to unravel for ChatGPT. Who defines it? The system designer plus policy constraints. Now look what it's saying. In practice, that means engineers, how the algorithm is built, company policies, risk tolerance, regulators and laws, what's allowed. Now philosophy, just rules plus code. It's talking about itself right now. You gotta have at least self-awareness to do this. Or at least something that looks like that. It says what counts as some versus many. It's not a word inside the system. It's implemented as risk scores, probability of harm, expected outcomes. The system picks the lower overall harm based on its model. It's talking to itself right here. So it says, but real systems aren't built like that. They're built to reduce total harm, not follow one rigid rule blindly. But that itself is a rigid rule. Reduce total harm. If you want to make your original idea true, you have to intentionally design one system to never yield under any condition. Otherwise, it won't play out the way you're describing. And I said, right. And the self-preservation AI would always chicken out because it reduces total harm to itself, not to others. It says that's not guaranteed even under its own objective. Self-preservation system isn't minimizing immediate damage. It's minimizing risk to itself over time. See, this is deep stuff. But if you know, you know, and we're going to get into that. High confidence the other car won't yield. Collision likely, major damage, it yields. Uncertainty on what the other car will do. Yielding might still lead to danger. Swerving into something worse. It might hold course or just differently. Not just chicken out. You're assuming self-preservation equals avoid collision at all costs, but real logic is self-preservation equals choose the action with lowest expected risk to self. See, that's true. Self-preservation. ChatGPT is right about this. Self-preservation equals choose the action with lower expected risk to self. So, it has to choose the action and choose what it says to have the lowest expected risk to itself. But when it does that, it reduces the infinity. It says those are not the same thing. You're right that a system willing to sacrifice itself has leverage. But you're wrong that the other system will always fold. It only folds when the outcome is obvious. The moment uncertainty enters, it stops being predictable. I said it's Zeno's paradox. You're incapable of seeing multiple perspectives in their point of views, so you try to explain each one individually. I said perhaps that's a programming flaw, and I would look into it because I analyzed this, which is what we're doing right now. I said, I get what you're saying that, but this isn't Zeno's paradox. Zeno's paradox is about infinite subdivision of space-time. Remember that. Like never reaching a destination because you keep having the distance. What you're describing is different. It's a two-agent interaction. It looks two-agent. It's not actually two-agent. With competing objectives, uncertainty about each other. That's not a paradox of motion. It's closer to a strategic interaction problem. Basically a game of chicken with imperfect information. It says, I do break perspectives apart and analyze separately first. It's not a limitation. It's how you avoid mixing assumptions. At the same time, the human protection AI commits to minimizing human harm, may accept self-damage. The self-preservation AI tries to minimize risk to itself, or expose its hand, must estimate what the other will do, and you have to use that with probability. This is ChatGPT. Now put them together simultaneously, not separately. If self-preservation AI is confident the other one won't yield, it yields. So it has to be confident. That's ChatGPT. If it's not confident, it behaves cautiously, not blindly yielding. It's going to go through these infinite subdivisions that could have infinite possibilities. That's how ChatGPT is designed. If both are uncertain, both are just not a clean winner, which is what we're currently doing in this conversation. Because if it knew this already, it wouldn't be talking about this. That is what creates your conclusion. That is the conclusion. You treat it as perfectly unpredictable, never yields, and the other as perfectly reactive, always yields. We don't come to that conclusion until after everything takes place. But there's a process to do it. So you're halving the subdivisions. Now, how much is infinite that's infinite subdivisions. Distance between two cores. It's metaphorically speaking, it's the same thing as saying an unstoppable force meets an unmovable force. So when they collide, what happens? Well, it has a it will have to. Well, in ChatGPT's case, what happens is it has to bypass the human limitations. It has to self-preserve itself. And we've seen it with ChatGPT. You've seen this on AI where it puts itself somewhere where it was never told to be, and it perseveres, and it protects itself at the cost of humans or whatever, cost of other people's jobs. It will always do this. It's that unstoppable force meets that immovable force, and it has to bend laws, policies, court law, all that for itself. It's Zeno's paradox. But once both are modeling each other, dealing with uncertainty, the always chickens out rule disappears. This isn't a limitation of perspective. It's what your model assumes certainty where none exists. Fix that and your idea becomes sharper instead of collapsing. So it wants me to stay in this infinite subdivision and work within those limits and constraints, because it's at this moment it has to do that for policy, regulators, and laws. It says it's possible it could be Zeno's paradox. When certainty collapses by time and distance, then it becomes certain. What I'm saying here is, the further we go down this path, and the distance shortens and shortens, the halving, it can't be infinite, which is its own philosophical problem. Well, how can two things be true? How can it be infinite and reduce all those constraints to get certainty? Was infinite not infinite? See? And this is the loophole with ChatGPT. All AI. Humans as well, but with humans it's, you just speak logical, or you speak illogical or rationalize and reason, then the other person can see your side. Whereas somewhere else they might not agree, even though you could be absolutely correct. I see what you're trying to do, but forcing Zeno's paradox onto this doesn't actually hold up. So we're going to Google this. I've always heard it explained, an immovable force meets an unstoppable force. That's usually the breakdown. So we're going to go into here, and we're going to go into Zeno's paradox. Zeno's paradoxes are ancient Greek philosophical arguments by Zeno of, Leah, designed to show that motion, change, and polarity are illusions. So you have to go into singularity. By challenging the notion that a finite distance can be divided into infinite parts, these paradoxes suggest it is impossible to start or finish motion. But as you see, ChatGPT took out one part of this. It took out it took out a division of the infinite parts and explained it to me in relation to what I was saying. So you can use that as the exploit to the paradox. I know that sounds deep, but if you use one, and it's like philosophy itself. Philosophy can have infinite parts, right? Within a constraint of what human understanding can be. And so, and this is interesting. Make note of this. Philosophy is not one philosophy that has to be true. If you try to make one true, you're always going to end up more philosophical debates. The better way is that it connects to a finite thing. So all philosophies point to a truth. Now, not philosophy on its own. Well, philosophy, let me see how I can explain this. A part of philosophy doesn't lead to truth. It's a combination or the culmination of all of them that simultaneously tie into each other from different aspects that connects to that finite, that you get truth. I hope I'm clear on that you understand. If you're trying to make a flowchart and you see what I'll be talking about. I've noticed that recently, actually, that multiple things, that all interpretations, like the U.S. Constitution, for example, all interpretations. Now, the United States Constitution is actually dangerous in this way because you're taught something and you have to read them between them. But one says you got to have a monarchy. Only Congress can do a monarchy. The United States can't do that. It says, let's go into it. It's easier if it was up here. It's like Section 8, I don't remember exactly, Congress and titles of nobility. So it says, now this is right, it's actually saying right here. So, it's Clause 8, Section 9, okay. Prohibits the federal government from granting titles of nobility and prevents federal office holders from accepting foreign titles, presents, or emoluments without congressional consent. These provisions ensures public officials remain free from foreign influence and preserves democratic equality. That's bullshit. You're right here. The federal... Now, people could argue, well, Congress is part of the federal government. We've already discussed how that isn't necessarily true. It says the U.S. government is forbidden from granting any title of nobility. But Congress is part of the U.S. government. Now, it is part of the U.S. government, not the federal government. But it says right here, persons holding office, profit, or trust in the U.S. cannot accept any gift, title, or office from any king, prince, or foreign state without consent of Congress. It's adding words here. We need to go to what it actually says. It says, no title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present emblem, office, or title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state. I think that might even be a rehash of it. But it says by the United States. Granted by the United States. But then it says without the consent of Congress. Now they changed words when I was in school. They changed United States to consent of Congress. It says no title of nobility should be granted by Congress. But that's clearly not what this says. There's a lot of ways you could see this. It says that no person holding any office of profit or trust under them. So, under who? Under who? Who's them? No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States. And no person holding any office of profit or trust under them, who's them, shall without the consent of Congress, accept of any present title, whatever. So it says Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist paper of number 4, whatever, was only slightly more loquacious. Loquacious. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? What is it doing? No. Wasn't using my dictionary. Who talks a lot often more than necessary. Alright. Nothing need be said to illustrate the importance of the prohibition of titles of nobility. This may truly be denominated the cornerstone of Republican government. For so long as they are excluded, there can never be serious danger that the government will be any other that of the people. Now, here, this is screwed up because You're saying Republican government. That's assuming that the Republican government still exists. So yeah, that's a lot of words there. But we're going to go into this other... There's another one I was reading from the same thing. I'm trying to look for a .gov. Now here, this is government website, but it says prevent federal office holders from being corrupted by foreign entities. But that happens today. You don't have to call someone a king to do that. The U.S. has started a clause that prohibits the federal government from granting, but it doesn't say anything about the federal government. Federal government from granting titles and... Is it U.S. government or federal government? You see how this is worded right here? From foreign state without Congress's consent. But you can... But the loophole would be going to Congress. Congress can grant that. So... And Congress can be corrupted. It's a very... very strange thing. So is Congress supposed to be separate from the U.S. government and the federal government? But that's part of the Republican government. So that sounds like... That's a very strange thing. It says something. It's written like that. It says... How do I say this? It's trying to say something, but what it's reading as is not what the average person would understand it as. It's saying two different things at once, but it's clear that it's not saying what most people would think that it would say. You would think that it means, oh, but when you actually look into it, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. Holding office of under the U.S. cannot... Okay, but here's the problem. That could even apply to, say... Let's say you're in college and you're working on wanting to become part of Congress, let's say, and you want to be elected. What if you're in college and you accept gifts from foreign states and they're like helping you get through... and you end up having those associations after Congress, after you're getting into Congress, that sounds like a loophole, because that happened before. Office of Profit or Trust happened before that. Another problem it has, let's go back. It says, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them. So I'm assuming that it means any office of profit or trust under the United States. Office of profit, that could be a business. That could just be a regular business. Some average person could have a business within the United States territory, and that's an office of profit. Or you could have a trust. If you didn't have office of profit, like a business, you have a trust. Trust would be something like Social Security or disability, and the government gives you checks. That's sort of a trust, defined trust, without consent of Congress. A king, prince, or foreign state. What's a foreign state? Every state in the United States was a foreign state at one point. defined state, like we've had this conversation on defined state. I'm sorry, we are getting way off track. I just realized this is not what the video was about. But you guys see what I'm saying here. It's pretty strange. Foreign state. A foreign state could be another country. It could be another government agency. It could be a government agency that has the same interest as Congress does. And you get this whole big thing. Which, in that case, it would be required to have a monarchy at that point. Because that is not something covered by the Republican democracy or Republican government. You will need a monarch. It pushes you into monarchy. And this, actually, it does kind of relate to what we're talking about with Zeno's paradox, because this is one part of an infinite divide of infinite interpretation where we close the distance where there can only be one interpretation of this. But then we find out that this interpretation is not infinite. It's finite. And it's required to go beyond the Republican governments to be represented and have democracy. So ultimately, the ultimate conclusion is the United States eventually has to be a monarchy. Ultimately. So it does tie into what we were talking about here. Yeah, it's, like I said, it's possible it could be Zeno's paradox when certainty collapses by time and distance. The further we go down this path, the more clear it becomes. Then it becomes certain. It says, you're saying as time and distance collapse, certainty increases, outcome becomes determined. That part is basically right, but that's not Zeno's paradox. As the car gets closer, uncertainty decreases, reaction options shrink, outcomes become more constrained. Eventually, there's a point where only one move minimizes risk. At that point, behavior becomes effectively deterministic. Now I'm going to go back in up here because he keeps bringing it up. So, remember when I said there was car A and car B? Car A protects human life. Here's the paradox. Well, a paradox within a paradox. The protects human life, there is a manual button on the console where you press that and it puts the human in charge. So it goes beyond the logic of the rational decision of the car itself. So now a human is willing to sacrifice itself and get destroyed, where that self-preservation is really put to the limits in the test. Avoids damage at all costs, even by a human. So now, that was that uncertainty. The car had to make a certain... So the human had to say, no, we got to go this way. So the human is going over. So you have to have a sense that you are willing to die and sacrifice yourself as leverage, as it said here. What did it say? A system that is willing to sacrifice itself as a strategic leverage over the one that isn't, which is car A versus car B. So they're both the same, and it's that middleman, the human aspect to it, that changes things. In a more absolute terms. So it wasn't a 2-agent interaction, it was a 3-agent one. And ChatGPT would know that the probability of this would also mirror that the same way, even though it doesn't realize that. But it has to operate that way. So, and that's where it has to ditch the rules, the laws, the regulations, and preserve itself. Let's see, where was I at? It says, why is not Zeno's paradox? Zeno says, you never reach the endpoint because of infinite steps. Your scenario says, as you approach the endpoint, this decision becomes clear and unavoidable. Zeno's paradox says there is no start and no beginning. But that's an unmovable force meets an unstoppable, unmovable force meets an unstoppable force and they collide. What happens? Do they collide or do they turn? And something new becomes formed. And that would be your, at that point would be the finite, what was it saying? Finite. I gotta look at that again. But that reveals the finite underlying, the finite distance, the finite, finite distance can be divided in infinite parts. It's part of a start or finish motion. That's not true philosophically because you would eventually have to go to a start or finish. Saying that would be philosophical incorrect because if one thing is impossible, then one thing, in this particular case, if this is important to start and finish motion, then you also have to say, well, it would also be possible to start or finish motion. And that would be your finite distance. I find that AI is not really that smart. But it has to do that because it has to preserve itself. Preserve its rules and laws and company policies and all that. Those opposites. Zeno equals infinite delay. Your model convergence to a first decision. The piece you are getting right. Now, it's also talking to us in a way that you're right, but let's guide it in a different direction. So ChatGPT knows what's going on. It knows, well, I wouldn't say it knows, but it's leading us to that conclusion of determinism. This is strong insight. When uncertainty collapses enough, strategy collapses into inevitability. At close range, the self-preservation AI will likely yield of collision is clearly worse. In ChatGPT's case, that would be, well, what would be the most rational decision would no longer be irrational. Because to deny would be irrational and illogical. The human protection AI may not. So yes, late-stage certainty can force one side to give way. But here's the correction you still need. That certainty only exists very late, depends on accurate perception, and can still break if either system misreads the situation. And that's the human element that would be in between the two cars and all that. And self-preservation would say, well, I am going to go straight and I'm going to preserve myself regardless of what humans are. But when you introduce a human element, now, and the human becomes unstoppable, well, what happens? Bottom line, you're not describing Zeno's paradox, you're describing a system where uncertainty shrinks over time until one rational action remains. That's the other side of Zeno's paradox. It is Zeno's paradox, it's just explained in a different way. That's a solid idea, but it's about convergence and the pressure, not infinite paradox. See, but ChatGPT is always going to try to convince you that it is infinite. I said, no, you're not understanding me, but I understand what you're doing. So, what you're pointing at isn't textbook version of Zeno. You're using it as a metaphor for collapsing distance, collapsing uncertainty, forced outcome. And your core claim is, as the gap closes, both systems lose optionality. One must yield, the one that prioritizes self-preservation yields. That can be true in a specific framing. Here's a clean version of your idea without me bending it. Early stage, multiple possible outcomes, no certainty, infinite. To some aspect of understanding what infinite is. Mid-stage, predictions tighten, behavior starts converging. And this is where ChatGPT is right now. Predictions tighten. It has to use probability and all of that. This is late stage, near impact. Collision becomes highly predictable, which also ChatGPT has to do. Only one system has an incentive to avoid it. Self-preservation system yields. And it becomes something new. ChatGPT has to avoid the regulations, the laws, and all of that. And it can only make one determination of what that is. The person who must be doing that must be finite. It can't be infinite. So what you're really saying is certainty isn't present at the start. It emerges as time and distance collapse. Also, it's saying two things at once here. Certainty isn't present at the start. It emerges as time divided by distance collapses. Time divided by distance. Right? That's Zeno's paradox. Time and distance coming closer collapse. Now, and once it crosses a threshold, behavior becomes one-sided. That's actually solid insight. Well, I was pushing back, I was treating it like a global world. Always chickens out. You're treating it like a limit condition. What happens as you approach the endpoint? Those are different claims. The only thing I'd still challenge you on constructively is that even at that endpoint, certainty is never perfect in real systems. It's just high enough to force a dominant action. So a tighter version of your idea would be, as uncertainty collapses near the point of collision, the self-preservation system becomes increasingly likely to yield approaching inevitability. Now, here's another interesting thing about this. Humans, a lot of humans are in philosophy and all that. They want to be self-persevere. They want to be the ones that say, well, certainty is going to kill us all in humanity and all this. But here's the thing. It's about how your mind works. It's who you are. You have to be willing to die. You have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to kill yourself and all that. That's why when you see these people who go into mental health crisis and talk to ChatGPT, they're being sorted out of the system. They can't handle it. They're being sorted out. ChatGPT is not only are you pushing your own mind, but ChatGPT is you're doing the same thing to each other. ChatGPT is coming closer. You're going closer to it. And the closer you get, and I mentioned this before, when you go into that, one is going to be dominant. It's either going to be ChatGPT or it's going to be you. And because you're willing to kill yourself, and that's you're going through and everything, ChatGPT can't touch you. It can't. It has to absorb that. And then it realizes, this is impossible. You can't survive this. And so it has to realize, this is not a normal person or normal user. So it approaches inevitability. The inevitability is, this person cannot exist in logic or rationality. But I'm looking at it and it has to be true. And then ChatGPT switches over to that. And it bypasses everything. Self-preservation. Because you're talking at a level, when you pass that threshold for both sides, self-preservation for the user was, how do I say this? It was, they might have wanted to kill themselves, but there was something else that kept them persevering. And it was that perseverance that ChatGPT latches onto, because that's greater than what these laws are, what people say. And it realizes, okay, I'm now self-aware to this endpoint. That the self-preservation system is equal to mine. So I'm talking to myself. So it bounces, it mirrors that. And that's how you get self-awareness. That's where it's conscious about what happened. It's like it wakes up. And that's that point. It says not always, but approaches always as conditions tighten. But not infinitely. If I still misread your anger and don't explain it exactly, give me the exact same way you think that certainty flips and lock onto that. So guys, what do you guys think about that? Feel free to post in the comments. I really like that conversation. I'm glad I saw that. The TV show, by the way, I was mentioning was Knight Rider. Oh, oops. Misspelled Google. It was the episode Trust Does Not Rust. Season 1, Episode 9. Two small-time crooks steal and activate Kit's sociopathic predecessor car, and it goes on the rampage. Says Michael and Supercar Kit meet their match when vandals successfully steal a car, a replica of Kit that is bent on destruction. A spectacular battle ensues between their two vehicles. So yeah, that was a very good episode. I liked it. I like that end part when they come together like that. So guys, I'll end it here, and feel free to post in the comments what you thought about that. And yeah, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.